Well, good afternoon. Pastor Morris here with Bad Carl Phillips again from Christ Church. Good to see you, Carl.
Thank you, sir. Always good to see you.
So I'm glad to see that you wore the uniform. We both had these sweaters with the black t-shirt. So I, I didn't have to call you. You just.
I bet your t-shirt underneath doesn't say Boonshine Brewing.
No. No, mine is actually my Love Grow Serve one.
So. I knew it would be.
So yesterday we finished up our worship series on the gospel, and you too. We finished with the song, "Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own." What were your initial impressions on that one?
Golly, there were a million of them. I immediately thought of Cheers.
Yeah, sure.
And certainly that kind of circle of friends. I thought of Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was totally the opposite, about making it on your own.
Right.
When I really listened to the song, I thought a lot about my dad.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, and I think that was the case with the Thursday morning men's LACA support group. We all kind of thought about our dads and our sons.
Yeah.
So there were lots of different emotions that came to mind. You know, you're certainly always worried about your children and if you're doing the right thing or not doing the right thing, and you never know until it's all done.
Yeah. You know the line in the song when it's you when I look in the mirror.
Yeah.
That scared my kids, but
well, it scares mine too, but he has the same affliction.
Yeah. So yeah, and in the sermon yesterday, I referenced the point that Bono wrote the song about his dad, but he also wrote it for himself. That it was about going through the illness and death of his dad. He realized, there are just some things in life that are too painful, too challenging, too hard to go through on your own, and you need other people in your life. And then we looked at the gospel story, which I think is just a beautiful story in the Gospel of Mark of the four friends who carry the paralytic and tear out the roof and drop him down in front of Jesus. And the interesting thing about that story, the text says when Jesus saw their faith, not when Jesus saw his faith. The man
and I kind of envision that happening not out of him asking for their help.
Right.
Maybe he said, "Gosh, I sure would like to see Jesus when he's in town."
Yeah.
And I think that's all they needed to hear. It's like, okay, guys, let's make this happen.
Yeah.
And I think those kinds of things are incredibly special when they happen within your circle of friends that you don't have to ask.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not good at asking.
Yeah.
But and I think part of that is, I guess maybe in the big things in life, and fortunately I haven't had to deal with too many big things in life and having to ask. There are a lot of little things, and I typically don't ask because I fashion myself as a doer.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing stuff, and I love saying I did that, or somebody saying you did that.
Yeah.
So that didn't speak to me quite as much as thinking about my dad and raising Corey and Annie and looking in the mirror and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I know Helen and I and most folks our age kind of grew up in a society where I love you wasn't mentioned.
Right.
It wasn't something that was said very often. Uh, and and I think you can either repeat your parents or um, make a change for the better, hopefully. And I, I never end a conversation with the kids, or very rarely do I end a conversation with the kids without letting them know they're loved, and grandkids
Sure.
and friends.
Yeah. 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 Well, speaking of friends, you're in a lack of support group. You got that, community of support in your life. And in the message, I talked about what I feel like are some barriers in our lives to developing those deep friendships, that community of support. One of them that I talked about was just, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit. We have this cultural prejudice of individualism in the U.S.
Yeah.
And that somehow asking for help, needing help, is failure. It's something to be embarrassed about. It's a sign of weakness. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I thought that was really an important point, especially when you framed it in what we teach our small children.
Yeah.
About doing stuff for themselves. I had a flashback to teaching Chance how to tie his shoes, and I even built this wooden shoe thing so he could practice.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I ever said anything to him about if he needed help to turn to friends or pastors or parents or grandparents or whatever. I'd be willing to bet that Corey and Shelby have probably had that conversation, but and he does have a good circle of friends. And both Annie and Corey always had strong friendships and were really entrenched in Christ Church.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's part of the reason that I didn't talk about it much with them, because I saw that they had it.
Right.
We were,
and it's not to say that individualism or being able to do things on your own is a bad thing. It's just about balance.
exactly.
It's both and.
We were talking Sunday morning with the coffee group, and one of the things that came to mind for Helen and I is we picked up and moved from Ohio, where we were both born and raised, right after Corey was born. He wasn't quite 2. And we moved to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you're put in that situation, you really encircle yourself with friends that that can help and support. And we experienced that relatively immediately, thanks to church and a group of friends that we're still very close with, and neighbors, and
yeah,
we kind of reached out to everybody.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I am seeing a bit of a shift in our culture, especially like over in Lindley Park and areas where folks have front porches. People are starting to live in their front porch and their front yard again.
And it's funny you bring that up, because we have a fire pit out front. Certainly we didn't use it much this summer.
Yeah.
But we were out there every evening.
Yeah.
And saying hello to neighbors as they walk by. And typically we were on the back deck, or we also have we have woods in our backyard, and there's another area back there to sit. And we haven't even used that this year. We've been out front saying hello to folks.
Yeah. Interesting shift. You see the houses built in the 30s and 40s, sometimes in the 50s with the front porch. Then 1960 hits and everybody goes to the back.
Exactly. Yeah.
But now I'm starting to see a lot of houses in the 2020s where they're building porches again. And even people in my neighborhood whose house doesn't have a front porch, people are adding them now. So
right.
That desire for community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, I think the cultural thing, you're right on as far as comparing us to, lots of other countries and their cultures. But I do think that the COVID situation has brought us all closer together with our immediate families, and then just opportunities like this with Zoom and being able to use that technology um, has brought us closer together as well. And depending on how you use it or what you choose to read on Facebook,
Right.
I'm more connected with a lot of high school friends than I ever was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of COVID and Zoom, the another barrier that I talked a little bit about was just the pace of our culture.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember people saying, "Oh, well, we're going to be working from home. We're going to have all this free time." And the example I use in my sermons, a friend of mine had been trying to have lunch for 7 months, and first it was because we couldn't, because of nobody was open, and then for the last few months it's because we're both working crazy hours, and I know a lot of our folks on staff they're working more than they've ever worked, trying to reinvent things, put things back together. And that really kind of bleeds over into, maybe you're in the house with the same people or you've got people around, but you're so exhausted that it's tough to keep those friendships going, those relationships.
Yeah, definitely. I up until recently, I tried to walk every day. I tried to do 5 miles a day, and I've got a couple of church buddies that almost always show up when I walk at the Arboretum.
Yeah.
We connect and talk there, and it's always a great time. But a couple of other friends, I'll let them know that I walk every day, but it's so difficult with schedules that we really can't get together.
Yeah, have to be intentional.
Yeah, very much so.
Allen McGinnis, who I quoted in the sermon, I love his phrase, "You can't microwave friendships." They just take time and effort. So.
Yeah, that's a great comment.
So another thing we talked about or I mentioned was just what I call this barrier of perfection, that people are in relationships and then somebody says something, does something, and somebody gets hurt, and people are apt to just quit on a relationship when that happens.
Yeah, that happens more easily now. Referencing back to Facebook.
Yeah.
What somebody says or posts or agrees to or whatever. And a lot of people hide behind that and don't, maybe what they say or share isn't anything that they'd say to your face. But I think it's important to remember that one comment or phrase typically doesn't tell the whole story. It's hard to overlook that sometimes, but it's like driving down the road and somebody goes zooming past you and maybe cuts you off or whatever, and maybe on their way to the hospital. They may be distracted by something that's going on in their world, and just searching for some kind of understanding of what's going on in their world that you don't know about.
Yeah. Did I ever, you made me think about, you talking about somebody passing you. Did I ever tell you about when I was serving a church in Charlotte and I was going to see somebody and this car cut me off, and it had been a long day, and I made a gesture? Have I told you this?
No.
So I passed the car back, made this gesture, kept going. Well, I pull up at the house where I'm supposed to go visit this lady. Guess he pulls in behind me. Fortunately, she didn't realize it was me.
Oh, way to go. That's one of those times I always, since we've moved to the South, I always think of God as having this heavy Southern accent.
Yeah.
When he looks over the edge of heaven and says, "Hey, y'all, come over here and watch this."
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because I had I recently bought a different truck,
Yeah.
but I had a Christchurch sticker on my old one, and I didn't put it on my new one in case I want to make it.
Which is, we are not perfect, right? That's not fun exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last thing we talked about in the sermon anyway was just what you mentioned at the very beginning, the barrier of pride, and it's really hard for some people to ask for help. I don't know if the guy in the story asked for help. Like you said, maybe his friends were just friends. You don't have to ask friends, but can you say more about that? You said you found it hard to ask for help sometimes.
Yeah, and I don't feel I don't feel that if I ask for help that I'm weak, or have any kind of guilt feeling about asking. Um, as I mentioned, I'm a doer, and I love being in conversation with friends, and they mention something they need, or something that's going on, and just jump all over that.
Yeah.
Actually came across wrong, and just trying to figure out, okay, how can I help without asking them if I can help?
Right.
Because when you ask somebody if you can help, they always say no.
Right.
So just figuring out a way to help without having someone ask you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of what I thought about when we're talking about personal pride. I did have a couple of things in the song
Yeah.
that really struck me. The one line about that if we weren't so alike, you'd like me a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
what a tough line.
Yeah.
And then the other line that I thought was interesting, that actually Kathy West referenced in her choir notes about and I believe you mentioned it as well, was the reference to opera, his
Yeah.
dad opera.
Yeah.
And I think I shared this with you before, but I lost touch with my grandfather on my mother's side at a very young age because my grandparents divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And I only met him one time when I was 2 years old, and we traveled down from Ohio to North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
To Bakersville.
I know where Bakersville is in the mountains. Yeah.
Well, there's one.
I'm from the mountains, so
Well, I met him then, and it was extremely memorable. And he remarried, and they had a son who was a year older than me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I said to you just now that I was 2. I wasn't 2. I was like, I think 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he was 9. So move away, all that kind of good stuff. Moved back here, kept wanting to connect, and I never did. And we were out to dinner with the Lindquist,
Mm-hmm.
and Carl's proficient with Ancestry.com. And we came home and jumped on the laptop, and he found my grandfather's death certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And surviving relatives, and one of them was Robert,
Mm-hmm.
who I knew as Bobby, and we connected.
Wow.
But staying connected and chit-chatting on Facebook, he said, "It looks like pretty active in church. I see you in different church plays and stuff that I posted. And I said, yeah, Helen and I both sang in the choir. And he said, what part do you sing? And I said, tenor. And he said, well, I don't know if you know this or not, but your grandfather was a well-known tenor singer in the mountains and sang at lots of local churches in the area.
How about that?
And I said to him, I said, well, I see that you're active as well, and you must have been in some church plays. And he said, oh, you're not going to believe this. He said, every year they ask me to play the part of Judas. Well, I am always playing the part of Judas at Christ Church.
Right.
So,
that's great.
Oh, what a tangled weave our family heritage plays upon us.
You didn't trace yourself back to Iscariot, did you?
No, but I'm sure somebody already has.
Well, any other thoughts about
No, just just lots of things about my dad and making sure that whatever those little bumps in the road were that happened along the way that I didn't repeat, and it just I thought it was an outstanding sermon. I love the song just because the whole thing in one package was very thought-provoking, and lots of good conversation, both in the Thursday morning men's group and in Coffee Talk. And one thing that I did want to make sure that I mention, and I'll mention his name. It was such a good thought that I was going to take credit for it, but I know he's probably going to watch this. And that's that Joe Grady said how much God needs community as well.
Yeah.
That we need to be his community,
right,
in order to accomplish what needs to be accomplished here on earth.
Yeah. If you think about it, as Trinitarian people, God exists in community, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So that's the essence of who God is community.
Right.
So,
Right.
well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for sharing you too with us.
Well, thanks for asking. It's always a treat to visit with you, virtually or not.
Yeah. Well, we move on to a new series next week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're already looking that over in the Thursday morning men's group. So
Okay, great.
we'll give you a list of what not to say.
I would appreciate that.